If you are interested in getting into web or app design, you are looking at different tools that may help you get started, and you are thinking about whether or not you want to learn Figma, this video might be for you. If you want to take this design further into animation and prototyping or components or finding ways to speed up your design workflow, or if you want to continue to learn the skills, principles, and practices to help elevate your design, subscribe to my channel for weekly videos. Figma is a tool that helps you create, prototype, and collaborate on design. Some of the reasons why I personally use Figma over other tools as part of my design stack is that if you're getting started, it's very easy to use. It's browser-based, meaning that I can use it both on my Mac and my Windows. It has a really nice and friendly community. You can reach out to people that are Figma experts. It's got a built-in Figma community where you can access other people's open source design to create your own. And last but not least, it's free. What we are going to design today is probably the most widely recognized and used user interface of the internet. You are probably guessing this, right? It's the Google homepage. The first thing worth mentioning before we get into the design is that in order to use Figma, you need a Figma account. And the way to do that is you go to figma.com, click on sign up, and you just follow that sign up process. And eventually, as you're done, you will land into something like this, from which you can create a new file, or in this case, I will also be providing in the description of this video a link to the design file that you can duplicate from the Figma community. So you can just get started from there. This is what we want to design today. Generally, when I'm looking at something like this, it helps to look at it at once and be able to break it down into a couple sections that we're going to design one after the other. So if I'm looking at this, I probably can identify three main areas. This top navigation here, the middle area that includes the Google logo, the search bar, there's a couple buttons here, and some text with a little link to change language. And then there is a footer section here that tells me the location and then some businessy Google links. Let's go back to start. And the first thing is you want to create that frame where everything else is going to live. So the way to do that is by pressing on your keyboard either A or F to access this panel here. That's going to essentially give me some options for what kind of frames I can insert. Or as you can see, I can also come up here where it says region tools, and here I can pick frame. And when you are creating a frame, you can either do it manually like this. So here's a frame, and you can see there's a frame on the canvas and also here on the left panel. These are your layers. You can see frame 1 is already present here. Or let's delete this. I will press F again, and I'm going to go here to my right side panel, and I'm going to select MacBook Pro. I'm going to change this naming here to Google Home. The first thing we want to do is, as we mentioned, start by that top navigation area. And we can start on here in the top left corner. And in order to add some text, so if we remember correctly, there were two texts there, one for the About page and one for the store. So to add text, all I have to do is either click on the text icon right here, or I can simply use the keyboard shortcut T, and it will automatically highlight that control. And I can just click on the canvas, and you see that it automatically creates a text layer for us on the left panel. And I'm going to start typing. So this will be About. And I press escape to get out of that typing. So in the case of Google, we're going to go with Roboto. So you see here I have the layer is highlighted. So when you highlight a layer, or when a layer is active, essentially this panel here, the design and more commonly known as a properties panel by Figma terminology, allows you to modify everything that's possible about that particular layer, in this case, text. So as expected, you can see here that you can modify the typeface that you're using, you can modify the weight, you can modify the size, and many other properties of typography. So in our case, we're going to stick to Roboto, since that is the closest typeface that we have for this particular use case. And we're going to simply modify this just a tiny bit. So I'm going to change the font size to 13 to match what's on the Google website. And additionally, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this around. So as you can see, I can use the keyboard arrows to move this layer around. And if I want to move in greater amounts, I can maintain my shift key pressed. And as you can see now, it's going in nudges. Super helpful. So in our case, we want to do 24 by 24 on the top and the left of this layer. So the way that I'm seeing these numbers is with the layer active, I'm going to hold on my Alt key, and automatically this is what I get, right? So I get the Y value from the top. This is 45, and then the X value is 113, and I'm going to bring this up to 24 by 24, and we're good to go. And the next thing is to create that secondary link. So this will be store. So here we're going to put a 16 pixel difference between the two, and I'm going to call it store. Awesome. So we're essentially done with this area. We can move to the top right. So I'm just going to scroll through into this area. And in this area, we have something fairly similar. We've got two text links. We've got a grid icon, and then we have the profile picture of the person that signed in into Google. So the first thing we want to do is have those two text links. So I'm going to grab these. So you can multi-select layers by holding your shift key. So if I press on this and holding my shift, and then I press on this, then now both are selected. And if I now hold my Alt key and then drag, you see that I'm creating a whole copy of everything that I had selected. So this is a very, very useful and very heavily used way of easily duplicating things across your interface. You're going to be using this a lot. So I'm going to bring these over. And as you can see, as I'm moving it, Figma is giving me a little bit of a adjustment here for the positioning to make sure that things are aligned. So what do I want to do here? I want to change this to Gmail, and I want to change this to images. And before we get into aligning these to the right, I'm missing a couple things here. One of them, as we mentioned earlier, is that grid icon. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 9 rectangles, and then we're going to bring them together to define that icon. So I'm going to create 9 4x4 rectangles. And the way to create a rectangle is either you come up here to the shape tools, and here you can see you can create multiple shapes, not just a rectangle, but also lines, arrows, circles, and so on. And I'm going to stick to rectangle, and I'm going to do that 4x4. So I'm going to just do just like that. And now if you'll remember, I can hold my Alt key to easily duplicate this layer. So I'm going to duplicate that, give myself a little bit of spacing, and now I'm going to hold my Shift key to select all of these and just duplicate them in there. Awesome. Now that we have this, I can essentially do a group selection. You can see I have all of my rectangle layers selected, and I'm going to right click into it, and I'm going to say frame selection. And now I've got a frame. And this frame is theoretically the same kind of object, if you'll recall, as this frame. And you can see they have the same icon as well. Think about frames as just containers that can contain things that you put inside of them. So in the case of Google Home, that container is being used as your screen interface. But in this case, we are using a frame as a way to group 9 4x4 rectangles to create an icon. So just to make sure this is not confusing, I'm going to change this frame 1 to apps, let's say. Since this is where if you were to click on it, you would get a little modal with all the different apps that you can access through your Google services. And the last thing that we're missing here is the profile picture of the person that's logged in. So to do that, I'm going to create a rectangle. So press R, and now I'm going to hold my Shift key to create a perfectly dimensioned rectangle as I move down. So it's going to keep the height and the width equal. And I'm going to go all the way down up to 32 by 32. And profile pictures, in this case, of course, are circular. So we want to have some kind of corner radius to this that makes it feel like a circle rather than a rectangle. So there's a very easy way to do it. All you have to do is go onto any of these corners here and just drag them into the middle until you can't drag them anymore. So you'll see now that I have a perfectly dimensioned 32 by 32 circle, even though here it says rectangle. So let's call this profile image. Awesome. Now, we won't get much into plugins in this particular video, but just so you know, Figma has an ecosystem of plugins that can help you speed up your workflow in different ways. And one of the plugins that I use a lot is the UI Faces plugin, which helps me access open source, free to use images of people that I put into my design for mock purposes. So I just right click into it, I go to plugins, and I'm going to go to UI Faces. And now essentially what I want to do is pick an Unsplash happy person to be featured in this design. There we go. This person looks very happy. So now let's start doing the alignment of all these things now that we have them all in play. So what I'm going to want to do here is do a 32 on the right, maybe do just about half on the top. Then I'm gonna bring this here to 16 as well from this side. So as you can tell, I am using multiples of 8, and there's a science and a reason for why this is. We can talk about the 8-pixel grid and grids in general in a separate video, but just for the sake of going through this tutorial, just so you know, it is very intentional what we're doing here. So now that we have this here, one thing I want to do is go over here to selection colors, which essentially is going to tell me all of the colors that are living inside this frame. And in this case, we have C4, C4, C4. I'm going to want to change this to a little bit of a darker tone. And we're going to use for this particular occasion 73, 73, 73. That looks a lot more like it. And now I'm going to bring the text to the side here. I'm going to bring a little bit more distance than just 16 pixels. And I'm going to try to see how I'm going to align this. Probably like that. Or like that. Let's keep it like this. 20 from the side there, And then we want to keep the text still with that 16 pixel difference to be consistent. Awesome. So the last thing that we're missing here before we actually give this top navigation a wrap is to make sure that these text layers are following the appropriate color. So for the text here, it's going to be, I'm going to come down here with both selected, and I'm going to come down here to fill, and I'm going to change this to 404040. And then I'm going to come down here to Gmail and images, and these ones are intentionally a little bit darker because they are more significant, more relevant as part of this interface. And I'm going to change it to 21, 21, 21. And as you can see, we have just finished top navigation. The next area we want to do is that center area with the logo and the search bar and the buttons. So let's go ahead and, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to bring it here. This is just another frame that contains some vectors. I downloaded this logo from the internet. I will drop the link below if you're interested from where I got that from. It's this website with a bunch of other logos from many other companies, and it gives me this vectorized frame here. And by vectorized, I mean that internally within this frame, each of these is a modifiable vector. Okay, so we got that out of the way. It's just worth noting that this is centered, and you can use these tools here that Figma provides you to make sure that things are centered how you want them to be. So if this was, for example, like this, and you would say, this doesn't look very good, you can just press here to align horizontal center, and it will align the layer based on its parent frame, in this case the Google Home. The next thing we want to do is configure that search bar. So in this case, what we're going to do is press on the F key to create a frame, and we're going to do 584 width and 46 height. There we go. Now, doing what we just mentioned about the horizontal alignment, well, in this case, yeah, horizontal alignment. And now doing what we just covered, I'm going to come here to my alignment tools, and I'm going to press on align horizontal centers. And just to make sure we don't forget to see this, I'm going to, for now, create a simple stroke just to make sure we know that this object is here. Okay, so what we want to do next is cover that roundedness of the search bar. So I'm going to come here, and instead of doing the previous way of giving my corner radius, another way you can do it is actually come here, and where you see this 0, this is the corner radius of that frame. I'm just going to introduce one really large number, just so that when this resizes, the corner radius won't be affected. So let's just go for 1000. And if you put a very large number, it typically is for the purpose of making sure that the corner radius is as wide as it has to be as circular as possible, which is the intent that we have for this particular component. Now that we have that, we're going to come down here into the color of the stroke, and we're going to do VFE1E5. This should give me a very light gray color with a little bit of a blue hue. So this is exactly what the color we were looking for. Now I'm going to change this to search bar. And inside that search, there are 2 icons that we have to introduce. So I'm just going to grab them from the end here. And one of them is this search icon. So I'm going to grab it, copy, and paste it inside the frame. And then make sure that when you are introducing things into the frame, make sure that the structure of your layer is appropriate. So in this case, we want to make sure that the search icon lives inside the search frame. So I'm just going to double check my spacing here, pressing the Alt key, and it looks pretty good. There's a 16 on the side, and then it's as close to 16 as we want it to on top and bottom, in this case 15, so we're going to be happy with that. And then I'm going to just copy paste as well this microphone. So I'm going to come here. For some reason, Figma still thinks that this is the right cursor for me. Okay, we're fixed now. And I'm going to copy paste while having been pressed on the frame, so it will just automatically copy paste it in there. So there we go. And I'm going to double check this. This one is a little bit larger than this one. So it's going to be 16 on the right and then 13 top and bottom. As good as it gets. So this is starting to feel quite Google-ish. So now we just have to make sure we continue to follow that 8-pixel grid. So instead of 58, we're going to do 56. And now the next thing we're going to do is those two buttons. Press my F to do a frame, and we're going to do 128. Let's just leave it there and then adjust the values manually here. 128 by 36. That's going to be one button, and we're going to fill this up in a light gray, and we're going to use F8, F9, F8. So you can see it's just very light gray, just to inform the user like, hey, there's a button here, but it's not getting in the way either if you're not interacting with it. And generally, actually, people don't tend to click on this button, since when you are searching things on Google, it's going to sometimes just automatically take you to the search results anyway. So we're going to give this a corner radius of 4. And now, while inside, I'm going to change this to button, oops, other way around. Awesome. I'm going to change this. I'm going to add a text layer here, pressing my T key, and I'm going to call it Google Search. Awesome. You see there's a little bit of it's going outside of the frame, so I'm going to escape. I'm going to press on this layer here, and I'm just going to drag it to the center, and you can see there's a horizontal and vertical lines for me to know that I'm centered. And just to be picky, I'm going to change the alignment of the text to center. So if I ever have to change this, it's just going to stay in the center. But we want to have it as Google Search. So now when you're looking at the actual Google page, there's a little bit of a spacing between the text. I actually did that spacing here. You can do so by coming here and looking at this letter spacing here and adjusting the percentage. We don't have to do that right now, but just so you know, it's there. So, okay, so here's one button, and we want the alignment to be 32 pixels from the top in comparison to the search. And we're gonna just copy paste this, holding my Alt key for a simple copying, 12 pixel difference from the side. And this is going to be the same width, but we're just going to change the text here to I'm feeling lucky. And see, it was good that we did that text alignment to the center, because now we can change the text and it's just going to be automatically as centered as it can be. Now that we have these, the last thing we got to do is change a little bit the fill of the font. So the font color, we're going to change this to 3C4043. There we go. And now I'm going to grab these two. Oops, not like that. I'm going to drag them to make sure they are centered with respect to the canvas. And then I want to make sure that the spacing is 32. The last thing to do here for this center area is to do that language link that's below the button. So we're going to just type Google offered in Deutsch, in my case, since I am based in Germany. In your case, depending on where you are, it will probably suggest you a different language. So I'm going to change this piece to 1A DDAV. Oh, no, not this one. It's 1A ODAV. There we go. So it's worth noting here that to show you that you can actually change a text color within a text without having to actually change the entirety of the text's color. And you can do so by just making sure that when you're changing the color, you are highlighting the text that you want to change. So in this case, this part over here. Great. So I'm just going to drag that at about 24 pixels. So there we go. Making sure this is as centered as it can be. All right. So this is almost finished. The last thing we have to do is the footer. So in the case of the footer, we have two areas, two horizontal bars that span from the very far left to the very far right. And so the way we're going to do it is we're going to create a frame for that container. So I'm going to just press my F key and then go all the way. You see there's a red line on the side to tell me that I've reached the end of my destination. And I want this height to be 40. I'm going to come here. I'm going to drag it. Oops, not go too far. Great. And now I want this to be of a fill, so I'm going to click on the plus here because right now there is no fill added to the frame. And I'm going to do F2, F2, F2. This looks pretty good. And now there's a tiny detail with regard to this footer, which is that there is a top and bottom stroke that serves as a divider between each footer row and the surrounding content. And there's a couple ways you can go about it in Figma to introduce that stroke. You can either come here to the frame and add a stroke. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hold off on that and get a little bit more precise. And the way to go about it is actually creating a rectangle that is of 1 pixel height. And you could theoretically come up here and see this line thing, and you can definitely do that. The challenge with lines on Figma is that it's going to place it in between 2 pixels. So sometimes it's not the friendliest thing to work with. So I prefer to use clearly defined rectangles. So I'm going to drag this here, and I'm going to simply make sure that there is no spacing whatsoever in between. I'm just going to very gracefully and very slowly drag the rectangle all the way to the other side. I want it to be a 1 pixel height, as I mentioned, and I'm going to change this to a lighter tone. Let's do Dad CEO. That's a cool color name. I'm going to change this to divider, just to be clear on what we're doing here. I'm going to change this to footer row, just to be extra clear of what's going on. I'm going to Command C and Command V. That's another way you can copy paste a layer, and this is preferred if you actually have a hard time going with that Alt key and finding that precision to actually pick the layer. It's a little bit harder with small layers, so use Command C, Command V, and same logic, make sure there's no spacing and we're good to go. So okay, we figured that part out. Now the last piece is to actually introduce that text. So we have a 14 pixel text here that says Germany, and you can see it recalls that I actually used center alignment before. I'm going to change that back to text to left alignment. I'm going to align it as good as I can with regard to the sizing here of my footer row, and I'm going to want to set a 24 pixel distance from the left, and this is because we want to achieve a level of consistency with the spacing here of our upper text as well. So in this case, these are a little bit bigger. As part of the footer, I'm going to do 14. Now it's perfectly sized in between. And I'm going to change the font color here to 6F, 6F, 6F. Now we want to do the second one. There's 2 rows of footer. So, and this one is more about, so I'm going to hold my Alt key again. And this one is more about some businessy links that Google has down below. So I'm going to just change this to advertising. I'm going to then create 2 more with a 24 pixel distance in between. So there goes that. I'm going to change this to business. I'm going to copy paste. I'm going to move it. And I'm going to change this to how search works. And there we have it. And I believe there's also a couple more links on the right. So I'm just gonna drag these. And by the way, if you see me moving and selecting layers on the sides, because there's this little bug on Figma that sometimes my cursor is not really showing me what I want it to show me. So anyway, I'm just doing that to try to keep this tutorial clean. So I'm gonna Command C, Command V, gonna drag it all the way. Make sure there's that horizontal alignment. And in this case, I'm not looking for alignment with the upper area here, since these are 2 fairly different components. I'm going to seek alignment with respect to the spacing that I had on the left side. So it's symmetric. So I'm going to look at actually having that 24 on the side. I'm going to change this to right alignment. And I'm going to change the text here to settings, terms, and privacy. And now the last thing I want to do here is take this and put it at a 24 pixel distance. Now, there's a couple of features worth talking about later on in other videos that will actually show you how you can speed this up by a lot in terms of keeping these distances when you're creating multiple objects next to one another. We're going to be covering that in other videos, but just so you know, this is the straightforward way to go about it. So now I'm going to just grab these in their entirety, and I'm going to just nudge them down to make sure we have a perfect alignment there. So now we can look at it. We can remove the sidebars to look at it in its entirety. The way you can do it is by holding Command and then press period. So this will give you this view. Now press here, and then you can do Shift 1 to zoom to fit. And there we have it. This is our Google homepage with our top navigation, the middle area with our logo, our search component, the buttons, and the text, as well as the footer area with these 2 rows here and some text. And that's it. If you are interested in continuing to elevate this design through areas like prototyping and animation or components or using more advanced Figma features, then stay tuned to my channel. We're going to be producing more videos over the next few weeks to cover that series. And thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.